Chapter 16. The Voyage to Suern. Before us lay a pleasure trip during which we should travel many thousands of miles. We proceeded slowly when we came above the base of the huge bulk of Pitak Rock, the mighty mountain, and ascended somewhat, so that we should be on a level with its high point. When at the place, nothing would suit the company except a stop on the summit, and together we all placed foot in the snows on the Pitak, which thing was done chiefly to please Anzumi, who said that the place was very interesting on account of what had there happened to me. Then again, we were under way, descending from the higher altitudes in order to better view the thickly inhabited, though mountainous country beneath us, between Pitak Rock and East Poseid. At the approach of sunset, a dull roar arose to the ear, and soon the long white shore of old ocean flashed beneath a moment, and in a little time was far behind, with the waters, lead color in the twilight, beneath, behind, before, and on both sides, no land in sight, and over 1,000 miles east the country of Necropan. Without going at a full rate of speed, we could not expect to be above that land in less than 2 or 3 hours, but as it would be dark ere reaching it, we slackened speed to 150 miles per hour, closed the deck, and went into the salon, where incandescent lamps lit up the darkening night glooms. A trip by Vaux could never prove so monotonous as a journey in even the fastest of ocean steamships so often is today. The variety of scenery, the wide views possible, for altitude was dependent wholly on pleasure, the external cold being unheeded by people who sat in a parlor warmed by means from Navas and furnished with air of the proper density by the same night-side forces. All this tended to prevent ennui. Then too the rapid transit changed the aspect of things beneath so fast that the spectator looking backwards gazed upon a dissolving view. As an aside, the currents derived from the night side of nature permitted the attainment of the same speed as that of the diurnal rotation of the earth. For example, supposing we were at an altitude of 10 miles, and the time the instant of the sun's meridian, at that meridian moment we could remain indefinitely bows on while the earth revolved beneath at approximately 17 miles every minute. Or the reverse direction keys could be set, and our Vaux would speed away from where it was meridian on the surface beneath, at the same almost frightful rate, frightful to one unused to it, as my reader is now, but one day will not be, if, as I hope, he or she will live to see Vauxy rediscovered, nor need the life be a very long one ere then. While we had such preventives of ennui, we lacked not commoner means of enjoyment. We had our Naima, in the mirrors and vibrators of which our friends, however distant, could appear in image of form and of voice, life-sized and with undiminished vocal volume. The salons of the great passenger Vauxa had libraries, musical instruments, and potted plants, amongst the flowers of which birds similar to the modern domestic canary darted about. At about the 10th hour it was reported that Necropan was beneath, and at this surprising information, because at the speed I had ordered we should have been at least 6 hours longer in coming to that country, I inquired of the Vauxman his reason for increasing speed without orders. No good reason being given, I severely reprimanded the conductor, and ordered that a descent be made to terra firma, in order that we might travel by day over the wasted land, as our word Satamund may be translated, which is the Sahara Desert of today. This great waste some of our party had never seen, and to allow them the privilege, we settled down to spend the night on an elevated ridge, high enough to be above malarious influences, for we were near where modern Liberia lies. The proud bird, the condor of the Andes, that can sail through heaven's unfathomable depths, or brave the fury of the northern hurricane, and bathe his plumage in the thunder's home, furls his broad wings at nightfall, and sinks down to rest upon his mountain crag. Though we called it Satamund, or the wasted land. Yet it was not such a region then as it is now. Water, if not as abundant as it was in Poseid, was abundant enough to give a wealth of tropical trees of the hardier sorts, sufficient at least to hide the nakedness of the slopes and hills of that old seabed. There were even a few saline lakes there, broad and blue, and it was around these that the population was centered. But the same dread catastrophe that overtook fair Poseid laid its terrible hand upon Necropan, and its beauty of verdure went out from the land, because the geological changes withdrew all the water from the surface, and hid it so that only artesian augurs could find it. The same mighty throe rent the rocks through and through in southwest Incalia, and today there is in that arid region scenery most fantastic, weird past the power of my pen to describe, where flows the Rio Gila, the Colorado, and Colorado Chiquita. But I will reserve the description, and when it is given, it shall be in other words than mine, so that thou and I, my friend, shall together have the pleasure of enjoying a fine word painting. In Poseid and Suern, and wherever civilization extended its scepter, it was the universal law and mankind's pleasure to obey the heavenly mandate, which the general accordance with the solar life spirit taught us required the planting, instead of careless rejection, of seeds of goodly flower or fruit, for shade, for beauty, for utility, wherever it chanced that a favorable spot offered, either in the habitats of man or in the untrodden wilderness. Indeed, in such trips as our party was then taking, it was a matter of religious significance to take great quantities of seeds and to scatter them from the Velk's decks at nightfall, both as an offering to Incal, as his sublime symbol set in the west, and also that the dews of night might ensure germination, and this ceremony was also held to be an acknowledgment of the goddess of increase, Zania. Thus, the wilds came to bloom as the rose, and today the world is heriter of that sowing of seed. The indigenous cereals, the wheat, for the origin of which many ingenious but insufficient theories have been put forth, and the varieties of palms that make the tropics famed for the grace of their cocoas and dates, and every genera of the camarops. And these things are because man, woman, and child found pleasure in that olden time in planting seed by the wayside. Go thou and do likewise, that the waste places may become full of beauty and be a joy forever. All hail to arbor days, which fulfill the injunction of Christ. They will surely make a return, and some 100-fold. A small pocket now and then will hold many a seed for planting, and though thou heedest not its sort, so that it be goodly, yet the Father hath said it shall bring forth after its kind. The storm. The morning dawned clear and cloudless, and was altogether so delightful that we essayed scarcely any forward progress, moving slowly, in order that the deck might be uncovered, and the company allowed to sit out in the fresh air and warm sunshine. Down below, a couple of 1,000 feet at most, we saw through good glasses various forms of human, animal, bird and plant life, and sounds came up to us in drowsy, musical monotone as our veilks hovered above. Towards evening the winds began to blow, rendering it unpleasant to remain so near the ground. The repulse keys were set, and presently we were so high in the air that all about our now closed ship were cirrus clouds, clouds of hail held aloft by the uprushing of the winds, severe enough to have been dangerous had our vessel been propelled by wings or fans or gas reservoirs. But as we derived from nature's night side, or in Poseid phrase, from Navaz, our forces for propulsion, as well as for repulsion or levitation, therefore our long, white aerial spindles feared no storm, however severe. As the windows, being frosted over, obscured our view, and as the night promised furious weather, we had recourse to books, music, and to conversation with one another, and through the Naim with our friends at home in faraway Poseid. No authority had Murus, Boreas, over the currents from Nabaz. The evening had not far advanced when it was suggested that the storm would most likely be heavier and the wind wilder near the earth, and so the repulse keys were set to a fixed degree, making nearer approach to the ground than was desirable impossible as an accidental occurrence. We might, if it were generally agreeable, take advantage of our privilege and enjoy the sensation of being in the midst of the storm, ourselves safe and under full speed, and brave the fury of the northern hurricane. The partial novelty might make us sleep better. When the evening passed, we should have gone to our staterooms. I therefore approved the plan and gave orders to the conductor to descend to a height of about 2,500 feet. Down we dropped. Our lights were made low in order to produce a partial gloom, the better to enjoy the full fierceness of the tempest, and we sat near the windows where we could hear, if not see. To the eye, naught would have appeared outside save entire blackness. To the ear, the loud beating of the rain upon the metal shutters was plainly, delightfully apparent. Against the sharp points of prow and stem, the wind howled and shrieked like an army of demons. At times, when the Valks was struck broadside by some counterblast, it would careen and tremble, but it kept on its way, determined as a thing of life. The experience was enjoyable, if not entirely novel, for it spoke to us of the power of man over matter, and taught us of the things of God, Incal to us, master of all things and of ourselves, who by him had this authority over the elements. When the sensation had become monotonous, the lights were increased to proper brightness. Again, we turned to books and games and music, as we once more sought the upper regions of the atmosphere, which were quieter compared with those of the half-mile plain. Anzumi and a girl companion sat apart from the rest of the company in a retreat formed of flowering vines draped across one corner of the main salon. In a short time, she came from her nook to where I sat, wrapped in meditative obliviousness. Touching my shoulder as she came close, she said, "Zailm, thou dost sing. It would please me if thou wouldst take thy lute and come to where Thurtle and myself have chosen seats, and sing to us." She bent over my shoulder, blushing slightly, looking so altogether lovely that I simply sat and gazed in silent appreciation of her beauty. "Come, Zailm, wilt thou?" I arose promptly enough when I saw a shade of disappointment cross her face, as she interpreted my silence to mean unwillingness, and I said, "Lo, Anzumi, I am but too pleased to comply, but how could I move?" Unsuspiciously she asked, "Move? And why not?" "Hast thou ever seen a bright hummingbird," I replied, "which, poised at a flower beside thee, kept thee still, almost afraid to breathe, lest it be alarmed to flight? Even so I could not move, lest— There now, if I were not used to reading one's earnestness or other emotions in the eyes, I would say thou art a sad flatterer. But come." "What shall I sing, little friend?" I asked of Thurtle, a demure, sweet little maiden, an art student, half serious, half frivolous in temperament. "Oh, dost ask me? Well, something, with a mischievous glance at Anzumi. "Something from thy heart," she laughingly replied. Anzumi blushed, but made no other sign, merely dropping her long lashes as I looked at her, while I said, "Truly, then from my heart this," a popular favorite, by the way. Ere the heart can know its own, ere the doubts of life are o'er, love in our hearts must have grown to the heights of heaven's shore. Truly, love is sought in vain in other place than in the heart. True love always hath its pain when from purity we part. May we cease from every strife, while in lovely verse enshrining Incal's blessing in our life, with his peace it e'er entwining, so is melody divine, when the music of the soul 'tis betrothing thine and mine. While the centuries unroll, yet our hearts are young and gay, seeking ever fairest bowers where shall bloom from day to day all the beauty of the flowers. There is one of all the rest, that alone for me is blooming. Deep the tendrils in my breast find forever their entombing. Shall I pluck it while in bloom, ready for the gardener's gleaning? Could I take forever home what unto me is no dreaming? Yea, beloved, we shall rejoice in his blessing evermore, listening to the gentle voice that as one we do adore. Thus it was within the vales, song and pleasure. Without was the storm, risen up after us. Into the teeth of the furious gale plunged our long spindle, giving no sign exteriorly, even had anyone been there to see, of the light and warmth, laughter and song of the human freight and songbirds within its staunch shell, amidst the flowers, a drifting bit of the tropics, safe from boreal blasts. No sign save only the gleam of the crimson fore and aft lights. While the others retired for the night to their various staterooms, I remained in the vacated salon until the announcement was made to me that we were above Suernus. No landing could be made, however, in the face of a gale blowing 80 miles an hour. Such an attempt would have resulted in being dashed to pieces the instant we reached the ground. In order that we might be wholly out of the range of the influence of the storm, I gave directions to rise above the level of the disturbance, if such a region of calm existed within reach, and there set the keys so as to stop all propulsion. Receiving this order, the conductor augmented the repulsion force by means of the levers of degree, and we rose steadily up, above the clouds, above the rush of the hurricane, into a clear, calm atmosphere, intensely cold, almost 13 miles from the earth's surface. Could we have had a view unobstructed by storm clouds, we were just about high enough to afford us a horizon of 350 miles. Soon after this order I went to my room to bed. With the morning the storm had not decreased in fury, and occasional flurries in the air above us proved that the storm area on the surface must be of vast extent. The cold outside was too intense to consider, even for an instant, the opening of the deck. The sky was almost black in the depth of its blueness. The sun, shorn of much of its dazzling brightness, appeared strangely dim, and the stars were visible. The steady motion of the air dispensers as their wheels and pistons worked to maintain the interior air at a normal pressure was painfully apparent in the awful stillness, while the fizz of the air escaping through the fine crevices around the windows and edges of the deck made such a noise that I ordered the set screws tightened and the ventilator pipes opened. Had the frost not hindered vision through the windows, and with the clouds prevented a view of the earth's surface, a sight most peculiar would have been presented. The view toward the extended horizon would have made the apparent union of earth and sky seem almost on a level with us, but directly beneath, the full separation from the solid globe would have seemed not like a ball, but like a huge bowl, ornamented with landscape scenes in its interior. As, however, we could not see, our songs, our reading, and our conversation went on, whilst the very faint beams of Incal, coming through the frosted glass, were supplemented by the same knowledge which gave us heat and air and position to defy the cold and the rarefaction and gravitation. Knowledge of Navaz. At home, in Poseid, there was no storm, but Menax at the Naim told us that the weather office anticipated one, the one of which we at that moment awaited the abatement. We waited until the sun set in the west, and came in sight in the east twice. Several times the Saldu appeared at the end of the salon, seeming in the mirror of the Naim as real and present, as if in verity a third of the globe did not separate us. Once only she spoke, and then in a whisper to me, as I stood near the Naim. "When, my lord, wilt thou be at home? A month? 'Tis long, 'tis long." A report of even the smallest events of our trip was furnished the news office and was printed upon the discs of the public vocalographs, to use a word of modern sound, and long before any landing was effected by us on the soil of Suernus, our fellow countrymen were acquainted with the story of our enforced suspension between heaven and earth while biding the abatement of the storm. Speaking of the vocalograph leads me to remark that the social superstructure of Poseid was maintained upon the broad basis of equitable laws laid down by the great ray of the Maxim. Through the influence of free speech as made and molded by church and school, and expressed through the millions of vocalographs, the three rendering secure the integral homes which, aggregated, formed the nation. At last the Storm King withdrew his forces, and the time had come for our descent. Down we swept from the vault of heaven into Ganges, capital city of Suern. Hast thou ever been in the ancient and long deserted city of Petra of Seir? That very peculiar city at the foot of Mount Hor, a city hollowed from the living rock? Quite likely not, for the followers of Mohammed make it hard to visit the place. But if thou hast read thereof, then thou hast some idea of Ganges, an old Suerna, built in the cliffs of the river banks. Such details as embrace the manner of our reception are too trivial to fill this record. Suffice it that it was suited to the friendly international relations of Suern and Poseid, and to my station and rank as a high deputy. Ray Ernon was far less interested in the vase and in the other gifts of gold and gems than in the captive Saldani, whom the tokens commemorated, particularly in the Saldu, Lolix, the Renu. I was startled at the monarch's close knowledge of the whole affair in all its details, and of my sickness and other incidents which were not matters of public note, but I betrayed no such feeling, since it was but momentary and passed as soon as recollection of Ernon's wonderful occult powers came to me. Speaking of the Saldui, but especially of Lolix, he said, "I did not send the Chaldeans unto Wallen as objects of lust, neither as a retributive punishment, that by exile from their native Chaldea they might atone to Suern for their fathers, sons, brothers, or husbands who worked harm to Suernus. No, doubtless they were not more blamable than is a tiger which hath a similarly destructive nature, but by the laws of Jehovah we find that ignorance of the law never exempts a wrongdoer from penalty. Law says in regard to sin, thou shalt not, and the penalty lies alongside inexorably and is dealt out unsparingly for disobedience. Law, therefore, appears not to be retributive, but educational. Having felt the punishment, no one, either man or animal, is apt to try the error twice out of curiosity. Nature makes no penalty easy, saying, when thou hast learned, then the punishment shall be more severe. If a babe fell over a cliff, its death would be the result, though its innocence knew nothing of sin, just as surely as a knowing man might meet the same fate deliberately. Now the Chaldean woman needed to learn that conquest, bloodshed, and pillage is a sin. The Chaldean nation needed a lesson also. It received it in the death of its prize soldiery, but such examples need finish. A diamond in the rough is surely a diamond, but how much doth the lapidary increase its beauty and value? Not to release unto them, those women, was to that nation what the faceting is to a gem. Thinkest thou not that I am right? Even so, Ray, I responded. For several days we remained in the capital, and during this time were escorted over it by no less a person than Ray Ernon himself. It was a strange people, the Suerni. The elder people seemed never to smile, not because they were engaged in occult study, but because they were filled with wrath. On every countenance seemed to rest a perpetual expression of anger. Why, I pondered, should this thing be? Is it a result of the magical abilities they possess? By what seems to us of Poseid mere fiat of will, these people appear to transcend human powers and set at naught the immutable laws of nature, though it cannot be said that Incal has not limited them as surely as he has limited our chemists and physicists. The Suerni never lift their hands in manual labor. They sit at the breakfast or supper table without having previously put upon it anything to eat, or elsewhere prepared a repast. They bow their heads in apparent prayer, and then, lifting up their eyes, begin to eat of what has mysteriously come before them, of wholesome viands, of nuts, of all manner of fruits, and of tender, succulent vegetables. But meat they eat not, nor much that is not the finished product of its source, containing in itself the germ for future life. Hath Incal exempted them from his fiat as creator of the world, which all men suffer? In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread? It is less onerous, certainly, on those who walk his paths, or even those who partly do so, and whose rule of life is continence. Such are more powerful, have occult powers that no eater of meats can ever hope to attain, but surely they are not wholly exempt. It must be somewhat toilsome to perform such magic feats as these. None ever got something for nothing. These people gaze upon the foes who come to menace them in their homes, and they are not. It passed o'er the battle plain, where sword and spear and shield flashed in the light of midday, and the strength of serried hosts is shivered, and the grass, green from the soil of carnage, waves above the crushed and mouldering skeleton. What Poseida could do these things, Ray Wallen, Incal Ismainin, but no more, at least none known to the public even by repute. But no man of all Atal had ever witnessed much display of such power on the part of either, and with the masses it was mere repute. I was favored beyond most Atlanteans in this respect. I noticed in our visits in and about the capital a thing which cast a shadow over me, that his people did not love Ernan, however much they respected him and feared his power. That the Ray was aware of my knowledge of this dislike was obvious from his conversation. Ours is a peculiar people, Prince, he said to me. During many years, centuries even, it hath had to reign over it rulers come from the sons of the solitude. Each and every one hath striven to train his subjects so as to fit some future generation for initiation as an entire people into the mysteries of the night side of nature, deeper than thy people of Poseid have ever dreamed of going. To this end, moral codes have been insisted upon as a coefficient of tuition in operative magic, but the endeavor hath never produced the end sought. Only here and there hath an individual arisen and progressed. Soon every one of these hath fled away from the less energetic people and gone to the solitudes, to become one of the sons, of whom thou mayest have heard. Generically we term these students sons. Specifically, we would have to refer to them as sons or daughters, for sex is no bar to occult study. It had long been a matter of interest to me to learn all I could of this band of nature students, Incalines, as they were sometimes called, from Incal, God, and een, to study. Thousands of years later, in the time of Jesus of Nazareth, these were called Essenes. But Atla, which possessed such a wealth of literature, had, with a single exception, no books on the subject. In that exception, a little volume printed in ancient Poseidonic, the details were very meager, yet its perusal had been of great interest to me. As I now listened to Ray Ernan, my interest was reawakened, and I thought I might one day become a candidate for admission to the order, but that if was of a large size. If the study renders the student so wrathful in soul as I see the Suerni are, then I will have nothing to do with it. The seed was planted, however, and grew a little when I learned that the angry bloom was not due to occult study, except in the sense that the lower nature was rebellious against the purity of the study and cast up the mud of anger, rendering turbid the clear waters of the soul. It grew still more when the ray remarked later on that the girl Anzimi would one day be an Incalinu. But the growth was not great in that olden time. It was reserved for a life to come, when decades upon decades of centuries had flown till now. The ray continued, Ye of Poseid dip a little into the night side, and behold, out of it ye gather forces which open the penetralia of the sea and of the air, and subject the earth. 'Tis well, but ye require physical apparatus. Without it ye are nothing powerful. Those versed in occult wisdom need no apparatus. That is the difference between Poseid and Suernus. The human mind is a link between the soul and the physical. Every higher force controls all those lower. The mind operates through odic force, which is higher than any speed of physical nature, hence controls all nature, nor needeth apparatus. Now I, and my brother sons before me, have striven to teach the Suerni the laws which govern the operation of this force. Through this knowledge, Jehovah leadeth his children, strength. Hand in hand with this knowledge are physical acts, powers that come early in the study. So far have they gone, but will no farther go. Morality aids serenity of soul, hence it is profitable to the Incaline above all things to be moral. But man is an animal in his corporeal self, and the passions thereof are pleasant. Love is of twofold nature, love of God and of the spirit pure and undefiled, and love of sex, which may likewise be pure, though if the dominion of the animal in man be over it, and so not so that of the human, it shall cause the man to sin, for then it is lust. I have sought that the Suerni may know the law, that they may be the masters, not the creatures of circumstance. But because they know a few things of magic, and in the greater feats were aided by the sons dwelling amongst them, lo, they are content. And behold, they rebel against punishment on account of the lustful nature they do indulge, and curse me mightily because I exact obedience to the law, and penalty for the infraction thereof. And they curse my brother sons who do aid me, therefore is their wrath which it hath so troubled thee to witness. My people do things strange in thy sight, O Poseida, yet have no wisdom, why it is so, and work their wonders heedless of Jehovah. Wherefore they are a brood of sorcerers, and do not work white magic, which is beneficent, but black magic, which is sorcery. It shall work them exceeding woe. I would, O Zailm of Poseid, have taught these my people faith, hope, knowledge, and charity, which same make pure religion undefiled. Have I not done well? Wallen, my brother, have I not done well? Ray Ernon was sitting in the salon of the Veilks, and now addressed Wallen of Poseid, whom I saw in the Naim as I looked around. Verily, thou hast even so, my brother, said Wallen. For some moments the noble ruler was silent, and I could see teardrops falling occasionally from beneath his closed eyelids. Then he opened his eyes and began a most touching apostrophe to and in some sort against his people. O Suernus, Suernus, I have given up my life for thee. I have striven to lead thee into Esped, Eden, to teach thee of its beauties, and thou wouldst not. I have tried to make thee man of all nations, and thy name synonym with justice and mercy and love of God. And how hast thou requited me? I would be as a father to thee, and thou didst curse me in thy heart. Keener than knives is ingratitude. I would have led thee to the heights of glory, but thou wouldst rather lie and wallow of ignorance like swine, content to do what are marvels to other people, but thyself all ignorant of their import. Thou art an infidel, ingrate race, believing not in Jehovah, content to live by the little thou knowest, too slothful to learn, more ungrateful to Jehovah than to thy ray. O Suernus, Suernus, thou hast cast me off, and made my heart to bleed. I go. From thy midst the sons go also, a mournful band of disappointed men, and thou shalt become few, where thou art many, a derision before men and a prey to the Chaldeans, yea, thou shalt dwindle and shalt wait until the centuries, even 90 centuries, are fled into eternity. And in that day thou shalt suffer until the time of him who shall be called Moses, and of them it shall be said, They are the seed of Abraham, and behold, even as now the Spirit of God is abroad in the land, imminent in the sons of the solitude, and ye do mock it, so in a remote day shall his Spirit become manifest, and shall incarnate as the Christ, and so shall the perfect human glow with the Spirit, and become first of the sons of God. Yet shalt thou even then know him not, but shalt crucify him, and thy punishment shall go down the ages until that Spirit comes again in the hearts of those who do follow him, and finds thee scattered to the four winds. Thus shalt thou be punished. From now until then shalt thou earn thy bread by the sweat of thy face. Thou shalt no more have the regal power of defense, lest thou use it for offense. I will no more restrain thee. My people, O my people ungrateful, I forgive thee, for thou canst not know how I love thee. I go. O Suernus, Suernus, Suernus. At the last word, the noble ruler's voice lowered to a murmur, and he buried his tearful face in his hands, and sat bowed in silent grief, except for a sigh of sorrow which once or twice he uttered. Several Suerni had heard his words, and these now left the Veilks very quietly and went to the city. Re ni Incal. I turned to the Naim as these words were uttered, and noted that a great shade of sadness rested upon the face of our own Re, Wallen, as he looked upon Ernon like himself, an adept son. Re ni Incal mo navazamindi su, which being translated is, to Incal the Re. To the country of departed spirits he is gone. Startled, I looked around at the Suern Re, who still sat silent as before, in the same position. I spoke to him, yet he gave no sign. Then I bent and gazed through his fingers into his fine grey eyes. They were set, indeed, and the breath of life was fled. Yea, verily he had gone, even when he said, I go. Come unto me, Zailm, commanded Wallen. I went to the Naim and stood waiting. Are thy friends all within the Veilks? Even so, Zoré. Take then thy guards and seek the palace of Re Ernon. Call upon his ministers to come before thee, and tell them that their Re is deceased. Tell them that thou wilt take his body in charge and carry it unto Poseid. Amongst the ministers are 2 elderly men and sedate. These are sons. They are of that body of disappointed men who go forth from Suernus according to the words of Ernon. These 2 will know that thou speakest truth when thou sayest that Ernon of Suern hath left his reina in my hands to govern, as I shall decide is most wise. But the others will not know, and the sons will leave to thee the telling of the facts. Great shall be the anger of them that are not sons, so that they shall try to destroy thee by their terrible power, disliking to be told that they are deposed from authority. Nevertheless, this do and fear not. Be of good cheer, for how shall a serpent bite if it hath lost its fangs? When according to these orders I had the court before me, I spoke as directed by the Re. It was received with a courteous smile by the 2 who by their demeanor I recognized as the sons of the solitude, but by the others great anger was shown. What? And thou, Poseida, offerest us such indignity? Our Ray is dead? We are pleased, but we, not thou, will attend to the funeral rites. As to the government of Suern, we laugh with scorn. Begone! We are our own masters. Leave us our ruler, and thou, dog, leave this country. For reply, I repeated with emphasis the assertion of my authority. I confess to having felt an inward fear when the brow of one of these never-smiling men clouded with intense anger as he pointed his finger at me and said, "Then die." I did not outwardly shrink, though half expecting to perish on the spot, neither did I feel any death tremor, though the menace, ever before fatal, was not withdrawn. Gradually the minister's fury gave place to surprise, and he dropped his arm, gazing at me in amazement. I ordered my guards to manacle and take him to the Vailks. Then I said, "Suern, thy power is fled." Thus said Ernon, "He hath said that henceforth thou shalt earn thy bread by the sweat of thy face. Over this country Poseid shall rule. I, special envoy of Wallen the Seventh, ray of Poseid, do depose all ye that are here from rulership, except those two who offered not scorn but courtesy. While they remain, which will not be long, I will make them governors over Suern. I have spoken." Indeed, I had spoken, and that to so great an extent, unauthorizedly. I was in an agony of doubt, lest Ray Wallen should rebuke me, but I would not reveal my real weakness to these ingrates. Instead, I took a roll of parchment and wrote from memory the form of commission of governors of provinces in Atla, appointing one of the Incalini to the office. This I sealed with my name as envoy extraordinary, following that of Wallen as Ray, using red ink, for which I sent a messenger to Anzimi at the Vailks. My reason for appointing one of the sons as governor was that only one would serve. The other chose to ask passage to Keful in my Vailks. Then, giving the governor his commission, a document which he received with the remark, "Thou art a man indeed, not longer a boy," words which, though so kindly meant, fell on heedless ears at the time, for as I made my return to the Vailks, I felt actually heartsick at what I feared had been the acme of indiscretion on my part. I called for Ray Wallen, and when he responded, I told him what I had done. He looked grave and said merely the words, "Come home." Imagine now my distress, not reprimanded nor commended, but without any explanatory clue whatever. I was ordered home. Then it was that I sought Anzimi, and having found her in her stateroom, I told her all the story. Our Ray was known to be one who could be severe in his punishments, although these took the form of disgrace meted out as public dismissal from office for being unworthy of trust. Anzimi was very pale, but said hopeful words. "Zailm, I see not but thou didst right well, and yet, why was our uncle so gravely reticent? Let me give thee a potion. Lie here on this couch and take what I give thee." She poured a few drops of some bitter drug, put in a little water, and handed the cup to me to drink from. 10 minutes later, I was asleep. Then she left the room, and as I afterwards learned, called her royal uncle to the instrument, where she laid the case before him. He was troubled at the effect of his words upon me, an effect not intended as he told her, and one which would never have occurred if he had not at that time been engaged in solving the very abstruse political problem presented by the new aspect of affairs through the decease of Ray Ernon. What further he said was, "Be not worried because Zailm is called home for no purpose of punishment, since I am well satisfied and called him for quite another reason." I slept for hours, and when I at last awakened, Anzimi, sitting beside me, told me all that Wallen had said. As it was then nearly night, I concluded to go to my own room and prepare for the evening repast. On the way I met the son who was going to Keful with us. To this person it seemed a great novelty to travel as he was then doing, although his remarks on the subject were few. It was, as I reflected upon it, something of a novelty to be piercing the air at the rate of 17 miles each minute, a mile above the earth. I tried to fancy how it would seem to one like my passenger to be doing this thing, but after 5 years of familiarity with it as a means of travel, I had poor success in attaining a sense of his feelings concerning the experience. As we traveled westward, the sun seemed to remain as it was when we left Ganges, for its speed, or that of the earth rather, was the same as our own. We had been on the way for 5 hours and had covered considerably over half of the distance home, the whole journey being something like 7,000 miles. The remaining 2,000 miles would occupy some 3 hours for transit, a length of time which seemed to my impatient desires so long that I paced the floor of the salon in very fretfulness. I have seen, since the days of Poseid, a time when a vastly slower progress would have seemed swift, but then the past had a veil obscuring it so that comparison was impossible. Man never is, but always to be blessed. Chapter 17. Re ni Incal, Ashes to Ashes. On a bier in front of the holy seat, by the eastern face of the Maxen stone in the Incalithlon, lay all that was of the earth of Ernon of Suernis. In the triangle were gathered a few witnesses asked by Ray Wallen to be present, and over all shone the mysterious light which required no fuel, nor for its tall taper any human keeper. High above hung the white stalactite ceiling, casting down from its many points the radiance of the lights which no one could see from below. Close his eyes, his work is done. Beside the restful form stood Manon, the Incalis, his hand on the shoulder of the dead Ray. After the mighty organ had sounded a mournful requiem, Manon made the funeral speech, saying, "Once more has a most noble soul known earth. How hath it treated him who gave his life to the service of its children? Verily, Suerna, thou hast done a deed which shall clothe thee in sackcloth and ashes for aye. Ernon, my brother, son of the solitude, we bid thee adieu in great sorrow of soul, sorrow not for thee, for thou art at rest, but for us left behind. It shall be until many years ere we know thee again incarnate. As for this, thy poor clay, over it we will say final words, for it hath done its work, and is committed to Navazamin. Ernon, brother, peace be with thee evermore." Again, the mighty organ played in solemn sadness, and while attendants raised the bier upon the cube of the Maxen, the Incalis raised his hands to heaven and said, "Unto Incal this soul, unto earth this clay." The body, bound with light bands to the bier, was raised with it to an erect posture, trembled a moment in that position, and fell forward into the Maxen. There was no flame, no smoke, not even ash left behind the instantaneous disappearance of body and bed. The funeral was over. As we who abode in Keful turned to depart, we saw that which no man then living had ever before beheld in the Incalithlon. Back of us, in the auditorium, stood groups of grey-habited men, cowled like monks of Rome. There seemed great numbers of them, collected in groups of 7 or 8 amongst the maze of stalagmite pillars which supported the roof. As we gazed, these men faded slowly from sight, until over 80 of Cephalians seemed indeed small in number in the vast hall, where so recently had been hundreds of Incalini, sons of the solitude in astral form, gathered at the funeral of their brother. Yea, verily had the sons come to witness the impressive ceremony where all that was mortal of their dead fellow was restored to the keeping of the elements of nature. But no man knows that sepulchre, and no man saw it ere, for the angels of God upturned the sod and laid the dead man there. Chapter 18, Le Grand Voyage. Ray Wallen directed me to attend at Agako ere resuming my vacation trip, although it was all arranged previously to the funeral of Ernon that my action in Suern was to his satisfaction. When I obeyed the ray, which was almost immediately, for we were all ready to resume our journey, Wallen, in the presence of his ministers of state affairs, tendered me the position of suzerain over the land of Suern. I was vastly surprised, yet felt that I might accept, and in conducting the affairs of that country, render good service. But the fact that I was yet an undergraduate at the Xiocquitlan made me hesitate. At last I spoke, saying, Zoré, I am sensible thou hast done thy servant a great honor. Nevertheless, my liege, feeling that I have not thus far acquired the full knowledge I desire, being yet but a Xiocquin, I ask thy permission to refuse the office. Wallen smiled and said, Even so, but the governor thou didst appoint shall execute thy duties for the 3 years intervening. The 4 years I would say, since I would not that thou shouldst study at all this year, and thereafter thou shalt legally assume active duties. I have an object in this besides mere form. I believe that that man who hath an object, a direct goal, in view, is more likely to win success than one without. It is a good stimulus. I do therefore appoint thee suzerain over Suernus, and dismiss thee to thy journey of pleasurable recreation with thy friends as soon as thou shalt sign thy name to this document. That is well written, though thy hand shakes a little because of thy nervousness. Be calm. This last he said, as, trembling slightly, I wrote the desired signature. Once more, we were on our travels. Anzumi the elf persisted in calling me my Lord Zailm when she had learned the story of my imminent suzerain duties. Our course was again eastward, although now farther south, for we did not propose to visit Suernus this time, but intended to proceed instead to our American colonies, as in the original route we had planned to do after leaving Suernus. We crossed equatorial Necropan, Africa, then the Indian Ocean and the present East Indies, but then colonies of Suern called Uz, then onward above the wide Pacific, still eastward. Umar, the coast of Umar, was the cry that called our little company to the windows to look at a dark, serrate line that bounded the eastern horizon. It was the distant range of the Andes, appearing almost on a level with our Valks, which 2 miles high above the ocean shot towards the hazy black line. Below was the broad mirror of the blue Pacific, apparently waveless because so far beneath us. Umar, land of the Incas in a far later day. Umar, where in 8 centuries more they must find a refuge who should be so fortunately fated as to escape from Poseid, ere, queen of the world no more, she sank beneath the waves of the Atlantic. 8 centuries whose lapse would see the proud Atlantean become so corrupt that his soul no more reflected the wisdom of the night side because, the calmness of morality being fled, the key to nature's penetralia would have been lost, and with it, his dominion over the air and the depths of the sea. Alas, poor Atal! But Umar lay ahead of us, and ignorant of the misdeeds to be of our national posterity, we and our Valks stood gazing on the coast we were so rapidly approaching, and commented upon its majestic mountain ranges as seen through the telescopes. Here we beheld a land where after thousands of years the conquering Castilians would come, led by Pizarro, and find a race under the rule of Incas, a name preserved through the many centuries from the day when their remotest ancestors fled from sunken Poseid, calling themselves children of the sun. Umar was the region of the quarries of Poseid and of many of its rich mines of mineral wealth. Here, too, were vast plantations, and east of the mountains were regularly planted groves of the rubber tree, the genuine Siphonia elastica of botany. Here also flourished the cinchonas, as well as many other trees now indigenous to South America, colonized plants from Poseid. Until planted abroad by Atlanteans, these vegetable treasures never grew outside of Poseid, and today the wild forests of peculiar South American trees and shrubs are the direct descendants of our regularly cultivated farm and plantation products in Umar. In that olden time, the Amazon River ran within dikes across the continent, and the trackless silvas of Brazil were then drained areas of tilled soil, such as the adjacent territory of the Mississippi is today. Someday this river, father of waters in the north, will sweep unresisted, undiked, across the lowland which even now its surface is above in altitude. It will do this because these things are certain to be in the mutations of the coming centuries. It will do this also because history repeats itself. Think not that thou shalt inherit, reincarnate, the glories of Atal, and escape its shadows. All things move in cycles, but the circle is that of the screw thread, ever around and around on a higher plane each time. But that time when these things shall come to pass, and no man be able to say nay, is yet far away on the horizon of time future, as far as is the grand recession of the Amazon on the horizon of the past. From the great orchards and plantations and homes of Umar, in the north of that continent, to the desert wilds of its southern parts, where one day trouble was to overwhelm me, and thence north along the eastern coasts, we took our way, leaving the doings of the millions of our colonists, the Umari, to the imagination of the reader. Successively we came to the Isthmus of Panama, then over 400 miles in breadth, to Mexico, South Incalia, and to the immense plains of the Mississippi. These latter formed the great cattle lands whence Poseid drew most of its supplies of flesh foods, and where, when the modern world discovered it, enormous herds of wild progeny of our ancient stock roamed at will. Buffalo, elk, bear, deer, and mountain sheep, all offspring of the remotest ages. I regret to see them so wantonly slaughtered as they are. Surely so old a stock might be spared. To these broad valleys were to come, in later centuries, invading hordes in boats, and over the far northern isthmus, where now are only vestiges of its former existence, the Aleutian Islands. They came from Asia, then as now, to a large extent the home of semi-barbarians, except where the sway of Suernus had extended a civilizing influence by sending out the tribes which, in a later day, were to occupy so large a niche in history under the name of the Semitic Ram. But the barbarians who went into Incalia, occupying the North American plains and lake regions, a future age should come which would find these hordes gone from the earth forever. And later still, curious people digging from archaeological remains would say, here lived the mound builders. Still farther north than this, in the present lake region, were large copper mines, whence we obtained much of our copper and some silver and other metals. A cold region was this, far colder than it is today, for it lay in the edge of the retreating forces of the glacial epoch, an epoch not over until much more recently than geologists have hitherto thought, and even still think. To the west lay what in early American days were called the Great Plains, but in the days of Poseid they had a far different appearance from that which they bear today, not then arid, nor very sparsely inhabited, though vastly colder in winter, owing to the nearness of the vast glaciers of the north. The Nevada lakes were not then mere dried-up beds of borax and soda, nor the Great Salt Lake of Utah a bitter, brackish body of water of its present comparatively small size. All lakes were large bodies of fresh water, and the Great Salt Lake was an inland sea of fresh floods bearing icebergs from the glaciers on its northern shores. Arizona, that treasure house of the geologist, had its now marvelous desert covered with the waters of Miti, as we called the great inland sea of that region. Verdure was on all the slopes of all the hundreds of square miles not covered with lovely bodies of water. On the shores of Miti was a considerable population and one city of no small size, colonists all from Atal. Reader, dost thou remember a promise given in previous pages, wherein I looked forward to a treat in scenic depiction, saying it was from another pen than mine? I redeem it now, for already the geologist is after me for having declared Arizona the scene of a lake or inland sea so vast as Miti, and so recently as 12,000 years ago. I am reminded that he has decided from evidence afforded by erosion and weathering of the rocks in that amazing region that while the Arizona desert was undoubtedly a lake or a seabed since the Paleozoic time when it was the site of a shallow ocean, nevertheless that lake was certainly of an age older than the Pliocene, being probably in the Cretaceous epoch. My friend, no. Those gorges and stupendous canyons are not merely the gradual product of time and water and weather. Per contra, they are of sudden formation, the rending and cracking apart of the strata in a similar but on a far more vast scale than the volcanic outburst at Pitok Rock, described in the first chapter of this history. The Arizona wonders and the gorge of the Grand Canyon of the Colorado were the result of an awful dance of the solid crust of the globe. Even now the lava beds of the rectangle between the parallels 32 degrees and 34 degrees north latitude and 107 degrees to 110 degrees longitude west from Greenwich in the Mount Taylor and Mount San Francisco region have few parallels on Earth as regards size. All over this hideous work of destruction, when the sea Miti had fled away into Ixtla, Gulf of California, the rains and torrents of 11,000 winter seasons, and the desiccating, powdering influence of as many torrid summers have smoothed and chiseled and wrought the ruptured, ragged surfaces into yet more fantastic shapes, and claimed the whole work as its own, denying the hand of Pluto as the major worker. And the geologist seems to have admitted the claim and placed the lake time far back, in order to allow a sufficient term for the execution of the gigantic work. And it is not so, for I saw that lake only 12,000 years ago, but now for the literary treat. It is taken from a very modern pen, but it is so faithfully descriptive of the appearance of the region today that I desire to enjoy its perusal with my readers. The words are those of Major J. W. Powell, U.S. Army. Quote, "The canyon walls are buttressed on a grand scale, and deep alcoves are excavated. Rocky crags crown the cliffs, and the river rolls below. The sun shone in splendor on the vermilion walls, shading into green and gray where the rocks were lichened over. The river filled the channel from wall to wall, and the canyon opened like a beautiful gateway to glory. But at evening, when the sun was going down, and the shadows were settling in the canyon, the vermilion gleams and roseate hues, blended with tints of green and gray, slowly changed to brown above, and black shadows crept over below. Then it seemed the shadowy portal to a region of gloom. Lying down, we looked straight aloft through the canyon cleft, and saw that only a little of the blue heaven appeared overhead, a crescent of dark blue sky with but 2 or 3 constellations peering down upon us. I did not sleep for some time, as the excitement of the day had not worn off. Soon I saw a bright star that seemed to rest on the very verge of the cliffs overhead. Slowly it seemed to float from its resting place on the rocks out over the canyon. At first it appeared like a jewel set in the brink of the cliff, but as it moved out, I almost wondered that it did not fall. In fact, it did seem to descend in a gentle curve, as though the sky in which the stars were set was spread across the canyon, resting on either wall and swayed down by its own weight. The star appeared to be really in the canyon, so high were the battlemented walls. The morning sun was shining in splendor on their painted faces. The salient angles were as if on fire, and the retreating angles buried in shade. The rocks, red and brown, blazed from their setting of deep gloom below, but above all was vermilion fire. The light above, made more brilliant by the bright-tinted rocks, and the shadows below, made more gloomy by the somber shades of sunlessness, increased the apparent depth of the awful canyons, and it seemed a long, long way up to the world of sunshine, and was a mile." End quote. Even the wide waters of the Miti, set about with towering peaks in the olden days, beautiful as a dream, were not more grand and glorious than these awful gorges come to take their place. From the city of Tolta, on the shores of Miti, our Valks arose and sped away north across the lake Ui, Great Salt, to its northwestern shore, hundreds of miles distant. On this far shore arose 3 lofty peaks, covered with snow, the Pitaki Ui, from which the lake at their feet took its name. On the tallest of these had stood, perhaps for 5 centuries, a building made of heavy slabs of granite. It had originally been erected for the double purpose of worship of Incal and astronomical calculations, but was used in my day as a monastery. There was no path up the peak, and the sole means of access was by Valks. In the neighborhood of 20 years ago, more or less, counting from this Anno Domini 1886, an intrepid American explorer discovered the famous Yellowstone region, and while on the same expedition went as far west as the 3 Tetons in Idaho. These mountain triplets were the Pitaki Ui of Atl. Professor Hayden, having arrived at the base of these lofty peaks, succeeded, after indefatigable toil, in reaching the top of the greater peak, and made the first ascent known to modern times. On its top he found a roofless structure of granite slabs, within which, he said, the granite detritus was of a depth indicating that for 11,000 years it had been undisturbed. His inference was that this period had elapsed since the construction of the granite walls. Well, the professor was right, as I happen to know. He was examining a structure made by Poseid hands 127.5 centuries ago, and it was because Professor Hayden was once a Poseida and held a position under the Atlan government as an attaché of the government body of scientists stationed at Pitaki Ui, that he was karmically attracted to return to the scene of his labors long ago. Perhaps knowledge of this fact would have increased the interest he felt in the 3 Tetons. Our Valks alighted upon the ledge without the temple of Ui just as nightfall came on. It was very cold there, so far north, and at such an altitude, but the priests within the heavy, well-built edifice never suffered cold, for Atla, drawing upon Navaz, had night-side forces at its call. The primary cause of our visit was our desire to pay devotion to Incal as he arose next morning. All night, the brilliant beams of light from our ruby-colored lanterns flashed the tidings to such Poseidon as might look our way that a royal Valks was in the region. Next morning after sunrise, our vessel lifted and departed for the east, that we might visit our copper mines in the present Lake Superior region. We were conducted in electric trams through the labyrinths of galleries and tunnels. When we were about to leave, the government overseer of the mines presented each of our company with various articles of tempered copper. To me, he gave an instrument, similar to the modern pocket knife, which I retained to the day of my death, and always valued highly on account of its extra-fine temper, which kept a keen edge, good enough to shave with, and rarely required to be sharpened. The Poseidi were adepts in this now lost art of copper tempering. In return, I gave the overseer a nugget of native gold. He asked me whence it came, and when I told him, remarked, "Any specimen from the famous mine at Pitak Rock will be highly prized by an old miner like thy servant, more especially as it is presented by the discoverer of the mine himself." Thus had the mine, found by me when an obscure lad, returned riches to the pick and shovel, which had rendered it famed throughout the civilized world. After taking counsel among ourselves, we decided not to make the farther northern trip, for every one of us had seen the Arctic ice fields at least once, while some of us had been there several times. Instead, we concluded to remain in Incalia for a week longer and spend the 11 days thereof in visiting more at our leisure the great territory where, although of course we did not know it, the Anglo-Saxon was one day to found the glorious American Union. History is said to repeat itself. I believe it does. Certainly races follow in the track of preceding races, and as the most important and populous part of all the North American colonies of Poseid had its habitat west of the Great Chain, now known as the Rocky Mountains, so also the grandeur of America will be upheld by the western and southwestern states of the American Union. Man likes pleasant places to live in. He likes those lands where Mother Nature is amiable and laughs with abundant harvests upon slight provocation. Man likes to live in a fruit land, and where shall he find anything more to his mind than this same southwest and west of the Incalia of yore? Along the ocean shore and back to the Sierra Nevada mountains is the region where, under Poseid dominion, lay a province not second in beauty to the lake region along the shores of Miti. And it has retained its fair charm, while that of the other has given place to drifting sands and cactus and the mesquite, and has tenantry of the Moloch lizards, rattlesnakes, and prairie dogs. It is no more the union of lakes and union of lands that it was in that olden time. When we finally left Incalia, that we might return home to Keful, the last of our colonial lands visible was the coast of Maine, for we journeyed eastward, then south. For change, we decided to forsake the realms of the air for those of the deep, where the shark is king. Like all Valks of the class to which it belonged, ours was constructed for both aerial and submarine service, the plates of the sliding deck and other movable parts of the hull being capable of very close approximation by means of set screws and rubber washers. To settle straight down into the ocean would be too much like a landing on terra firma. But being at a height of 2 miles, more or less, the conductor was directed to gradually reduce the repulsion current, thus diminishing our buoyancy so as to bring us into the water 10 miles distant from where the slant commenced. He was further ordered to do this while maintaining a speed which would, though very slow for a Valks, be really swift, that is, he was to cover 10 miles in as many minutes. When we struck the water at this rate of progress, the shock which the entering needle experienced was sufficiently great to cause its inmates to stagger, and little exclamations were made by the ladies. As soon as we entered the water, the repulsion was made nil, and its opposite, a degree of attraction greater than that of water to the terrestrial center of gravity, was set up, whereby we were enabled to sink to a considerable depth despite the air contained in the vessel. The lights outside the windows were started, our speed modified to suit the element, and then we all gathered in the salon by the windows, darkness within and the waters lit without, enabling us to see curious tribes of Neptune which crowded about the strange illumination in their midst. While thus engaged, and while listening to the delighted words of an enthusiastic ichthyologist, I heard a familiar voice in the darkness. I knew it for that of my father Menax, and accordingly went to the Naim. He could not see me because I stood in darkness, but I could see him in the great mirror, for at home he was in the light, and his image was so transmitted so that I saw not only himself, but his immediate surroundings, just as a person outside a lighted window at night beholds everybody and thing in the interior, himself unseen. My son, said the prince, thou shouldst not have allowed thy love of novelty to cause thee to act so unwisely as thou didst in entering the ocean at even the slow rate of a ven, a mile, per minute. I fear that thou hast a vein of reckless daring in thy nature, which will some day bring thee misfortune. Incal punishes the reckless by allowing his broken laws to exact their own penalty. Be cautious, Zailm, be cautious. After the submarine experiences had become tedious, the opposite course of a rapid but graduated augmentation of repulsion was imparted to our Valks, a procedure not dangerous as the other had really been, and soon our long spindle shot out of the water like some great bubble, then rose to where the RAS or repulse indicator was set for its government, only a few hundred feet above the surface of the ocean. There, putting aside the closed deck, we sat in the bright sunshine and enjoyed the pleasant ocean breeze, which blew in the same southern direction in which we were going. Desiring to reach home by the next day, when the afternoon grew cool, we closed the deck, arose high in the heavens so as to lessen atmospheric resistance, and made the quickest speed we could towards the south. This, I should remark, was not nearly so great as either an eastern or western course would have allowed. Thus traveling either due east or due west, we could proceed at the rate of a degree of longitude every 4 minutes. But north or south, we cut the earth's currents, and just in proportion as a Valk's course deviated from east to west, in that proportion was its speed lessened, until going due north or south, we could only travel at the comparatively slow rate of some 100 miles per hour. We saw that if we traveled home by the straight course, we would not reach Keful under 2 days, and having set our desires on reaching it by the next morning, the prospective delay was so tedious that we decided to run in on an angle. That is, we would head our Valks southeast for the Nekropan coast, thence southwest for Keful, and though the extra distance would be several thousand miles, the increased speed attained would allow us to reach our destination in time to take our breakfast at home. Beautiful Keful, there is no place like thee, Queen of Atlantis and Queen of the Sea. Chapter 19. A Well-Met Problem. Work awaited me upon my return to Keful, work to which I might attend without harm to my delicate health, in fact rather tending to its improvement, furnishing a proper degree of mental stimulus, without involving any of the severe tension of study. On the day of my arrival home, Menax said to me in a way which set me to thinking, "I understand that the people of Suern have lost the power which they have hitherto had of providing themselves with food by seeming magic. It must be a terrible problem to them how to meet the cravings of hunger." Whether Menax designed these words for the purpose of arousing me to a sense of my duties in the premises or not, I had at the time no idea. But I pondered the situation very earnestly. It occurred to me that these people had few, if any, cultivated fields like our own, that they probably had no adequate knowledge of the arts of husbandry, tillage, and like requirements, and finally, that they were not possessed of muscles trained to effort. In fact, they must be, in all matters of this sort, a kind of overgrown children. The more I dwelt on the problem, the more startling the situation seemed. I saw that they would, for at least a year, require to have provision made for them. They would also have to be taught the methods of agriculture, horticulture, and care of cattle, sheep, and other useful domestic animals. Later, it would be necessary to teach them such other arts as mining, spinning, and metalworking. In fact, here was an entire nation of 85 millions of people coming to school to me for tuition in the arts of life. As the full force of the position came to my realization, it staggered me. Ah, poor me, I fell upon my knees on the greensward of the gardens and prayed to Incal. As I arose, I turned and found Wallen regarding me with a most peculiar glance. His face was as grave as possible, but his splendid eyes were full of laughter. "Dost thou feel equal to the task?" he queried. "Zoré," I replied bravely, "thy son is hard-pressed. Equal? Yea, if Incal will give me guidance." "Well said, Zailm. Thou shalt call upon the resources of Poseid to aid thee, and they shall be at thy service." Not to be prolix, the schools were established, The food and raiment stations were placed in given districts, and the people of Suern, the great peninsula of modern Hindustan, with parts of Arabia, were taught the means of comfortable self-preservation and dependence upon their knowledge. Not all of this was done, that is to say supervised by me, but the initiation of it, and during 3.5 years, the practical work of it was conducted by me and my vice-suzerains. Perhaps I was not grateful to Incal, perhaps I never thought a second time, in these days of prosperity, of the prayer of the moneyless and unknown youth upon Pitach Rock. But perhaps I did too. I rather think that I was never for one moment forgetful of that morning and its vows. Yet it is a strange fact that human nature may swerve aside from what it knows to be the undeviating line of right, may be keenly conscious of every infraction, and still be able to feel that it has been true to its vows. Moral lapses are the most frequent, those sins which are not strictly direct infractions of communal equities, but rather of the Magdalene type. Strange also is it that mankind is seldom lenient to the victims, though generally quite sparing of censure for the real criminal. There can be no true justice in a decision on any subject in the world until, in crimes of this sort, equal penalty is meted regardless of sex. Does my proposition seem too sweeping? Consider then this: human justice is a system. If it be faulty in only one particular, it is faulty in all things, since justice means perfection, and that is not perfection which hath a blemish. In the history of the Judaic race, the later records of the deserving portion of the people of Suernus may be found. Verily, my people, we have seen glory together and long-suffering. We have stood together since before the age that is and that which passeth was. My seed of strong effort was sown in fallow soil, and it returned more than 100-fold. The end is not yet, the harvest is not garnered, nor the chosen people come yet into their reward for the great tribulation, since Eranon of Suern ceased to strive for them. The way was long, but they shall come at last from out the desert they entered so long ago, and Jehovah will give his children rest. As Rey Eranon had said, the Saldi general never returned to his native land. He wandered about the city, little noticed by the people, and made his chief abiding place at the Velks of a certain Poseid commissary stationed with the others at Ganji. One day, having become quite friendly with the latter, the Salda asked that his friend give him the pleasure of an ascent into the air. He had never experienced a ride on a Velks, and was desirous of so doing. At the time the commissary was busy, and promised to do as request on the morrow. Accordingly, after dinner next day, which meal was served on the open promenade deck of the Velks, the ascension was made. The general had taken too much strong wine, and was rather unsteady in his motions. One of the party was a Suerna, who had been one of Rey Ernon's counselors. The general stalked to the taffrail of the Velks to look down into the nether air. Standing near was the Suerna. Neither liked the other, and the Salda, also excited by wine, became quarrelsome. The Suerna the same, by the way, who had been so amazed by the failure of his occult powers when he made his attempt to kill me, gave the general a sly push, and he fell against the rail. Being heavy, his weight bent it so as to cause a still further loss of balance, and he fell over the side, catching the rail with both hands in a very agile manner. Here, unable to raise himself, he hung, calling for help in an agony of terror. The Poseid captain was not a bad man, but he was somewhat stupid, as a result of a fall on his head, and while able to give satisfaction as a commissary, he was not able to rise higher than some such subordinate position. He had, previous to his injury, been a talented man, and was even yet an inventor of some small note. This was a talent that did him small service now, however, because so many others outranked him in the same direction. He had finally come to be a lunatic on the subject, and was ever seeking to utilize force or to economize power. While the captain was standing in stupid indecision, the Suerna stepped in and pushed him aside, himself grasping the terrified Salda by the arm. The next instant the ex-counselor and the Solda General were swinging, whirling towards the earth, over a mile below. Then the Poseida looked over at them as they fell, and his mind all occupied with his favorite mania for invention, exclaimed, "What a waste of force! If only they could fall on some mechanism adjusted to raise a weight." How it happened, the commissary never knew, he averred, and for lack of witnesses, together with his obvious stupidity, the court excused him. When I learned of the event, it was through the governor, whom I had appointed, who reported having relieved the captain from command of his Vaux and commissarial office, and the placing of another Poseida in his place. The Solda was the father of Lolix, and I thought it well to break the news as gently as possible to her. How was I astounded, after having done so, to hear her calmly say, "Prithee, how doth this concern me?" "Why, thy father," I began, when she interrupted me with, "My father! I am glad. Shall I who love courage feel aught but displeasure at his cowardice in the face of death, wherefore he was moved to cry out in terror like a child? Faugh! I call no coward father." I turned away entirely horrified, silent for lack of words to express my feelings. Perceiving my action, Lolix came to me, and resting her small white hand on my arm, looked up into my face, so that my gaze was directly into her glorious blue eyes. "My lord Zailm, thou seemst offended. Is it so? Have I said aught to cause thee offense?" "Gracious gods!" I exclaimed. Then, remembering a former estimate of mine that the Soldu was only a child in certain respects, I said, "Offended me? Not so, Estiku." Then she slipped her hand through the bend of my arm and walked beside me. This little experience was the beginning of a longer one which, while very sweet for a length of time, yet culminated in anguish there in Atlantis, and phoenix-like arose from the ashes of the dead centuries only a few short years ago. Verily, the evil that men do lives after them. Because it was so very obvious that her heartlessness was only that of undevelopment, I was not disgusted with Lolix. I reproved her, indeed, but instead of turning away in unreasoning wrath at its existence, I sought to induce a perception of the enormity of such an offense as cruelty of heart. According to the custom of her people, Lolix wooed me to wed her. Of course I could not accede, pleasant though it was to have this beautiful girl doing her best to win my regard. I could not, while I loved Anzumi. Of this love for my sweet womanly little sister I never told Lolix, disliking possible contingencies. But I did worse. I told her an untruth, for I said that the Poseid law forbade marriage with those of alien birth. "Never an exception?" queried Lolix. "Never one. Death is the penalty." This was another falsehood, for in Poseid the death penalty was never inflicted, it being forbidden by the law of the Maxim book. "Well then, it matters nothing. Thou art young and strong, and of good courage, and handsome. Wherefore I love thee. If the law forbid, it is all the same. None but ourselves need know." The last barrier was fallen. Conscience slumbered. Thoughts of Anzumi were put aside as one would shun an accusing angel. Did I think of Pitach Rock and my days of sinlessness, or of the mysterious stranger whom I had heard in awe in the first of my life at Keful? Yea, I thought of these things. I thought of Incal, and I said, "Incal, my God, if I am about to do wrong in thy sight, in disregarding the laws of society and marriage, smite me dead ere I sin." But Incal smote not then, but afterwards through the ages. He smote not then. Conscience slept the sounder, but passion awoke. Chapter 20. Duplicity. The year during which I was not permitted to study passed quickly and uneventfully, except that complications deepened on account of Lolix. My affection for Menax became almost reciprocally as great as his love for me, which was limitless. But I did not tell him that which, heavier and yet heavier, weighed upon me as time lapsed, the secret affair with Lolix. To have done so would have been best, yet I dared not, for it would have lost me all that I most prized. At least I so feared then. As time went on, I began to query my position. Did I love this beautiful girl? Not as I loved Anzumi. O Incal, my God, I moaned in anguish of soul. Conscience slept yet, but stirred restlessly. The fact that Anzumi was my adopted sister did not prevent her becoming my wife, for the law of consanguinity was not violated, but my own acts barred the way. My scheme to domicile Lolix in a palace on the far side of Keful from Menaxathlon was successfully carried out without exciting the suspicion of anyone, not even arousing the jealousy of Lolix. Duplicity. Then I wooed Anzumi, unrestrained by the presence of her who would have been a dangerous factor had she even suspected that the daughter of Menax was not my sister by the ties of consanguinity. But my days began to be filled with fear, for I had sown dragon's teeth. The denouement of such affairs as have evil for a guide is invariably sorrow and bitterness. Suppose Lolix did not tire of me, and I had neither the heart nor the will to do anything to cause her to do so. Nature laws were ever liable to cause a revealment of the facts which would be fatal to my hopes. And though I often cried in agony of soul that I was an unhappy wretch, conscience still slept. But mine was not a character to be deterred from my resolves by danger. If I was engaged in a game of skill with the evil one for opponent, I would play to the best of my ability. So I determined to be rid of Lolix, a determination that was late, for the fruit of our sin was come and a home secretly provided. For I would do no murder. These plans were carried out, all fortunately as I thought, without any man being the wiser. But how to be rid of the really lovable woman, Lolix? Only a year remained ere I would enter examination for my diploma at the Xioquathlon. If successful, I meant to ask Anzumi, whom I knew loved me in return, to be to me all that the honored name of wife conveyed. At evening or of an afternoon nothing pleased Anzumi better than to walk alone, or with Menax or myself, through the palace gardens, under the spreading palms and festoons of flowering vines which canopied all the walks, forming long, cool tunnels of green, gemmed with flora's most radiant hues. From the breaks in these verdant walls we could see the mimic lakes, hills, cliffs, and streams, and beyond these could look out over palace-capped, vine-draped Keful, and its 1,000 hills, large and small. Walking amid such scenes by the side of her who was so dear, is it strange that my soul was at such times eased of something of its burden of sin and woe? So long did I defer action in the case of Lolix, that I came to fear to take any course except to let events order their own settlement. Yea, I lost confidence in my ability to solve the dangerous problem, fearful lest I should make a bad matter worse. Thus the days slipped by, and the examination ordeal was close at hand. Neglect Lolix I did not, could not, nor had I desire to do so. Very often I was with her. Indeed, with a strange blindness to the wrong involved, I divided my leisure between Lolix and Anzumi. I sometimes feared that Mainin, Wallen, or perhaps both, knew of my secret. They did too, for their occult vision was too keen to allow them not to know the facts. But neither made any sign, not Mainin, for he cared not how much secret evil went on, as we shall see ere long, nor Wallen, not because he, like Mainin, did not care, but because he was merciful, and knew that karma had more dreadful punishment in store than any man could possibly inflict, and his mercy forbore to add to my penalty. So the cancer remained hidden from public gaze, and I knew not that the noble ruler was a sad spectator of my misdeeds. I do not wonder at his sad demeanor when with me as manifested in the last year of my studies. Anzumi had postponed the time of her examination in Xio until the year in which I was to graduate, and hence the festivities which always followed the examination as a mark of rejoicing over the success of those who received diplomas included her in the honorable list, for she had passed with high credits. A dinner was given by the Ray to the successful contestants, and this feast inaugurated an extended season of high social dinners, balls, parties, concerts, and theatrical performances, all in the same honor. Anzumi, arrayed in a robe of grayish silk, with her heavy coils of dark hair, fastened apparently by a lovely rose, and upon her shoulder a pin of sapphires and rubies, was presented by Wallen at the state dinner to the new Xioki as the Istranabu, or star of the evening. This was a social distinction akin to the modern queen of the ball. Knowing that Ray Wallen would lead his niece to the table and be her escort, I took Lolix as I had a right to do, for I was a graduate and the possessor of a diploma, and all such might choose a companion who might or might not be a graduate. Lolix, for my sake, had studied hard during the last 3 years and was now in her 2nd year at the Xioquithlon, to which she went from the lower schools. I was growing proud of the girl and felt most tenderly towards her. Indeed, I would have been a most despicable person had I not, after her sacrifice for me. Several times I found Wallen looking intently at me. I sat not far from him, and once, as he passed me after the feast, he murmured sadly, "Oh, Zailm, Zailm." As may be imagined, this address did not increase my peace of mind, but that night passed without any further disquiet, as so many others had done. As I walked with Lolix in the great hall of Agako, I remarked the many glances of admiration bestowed upon her beauty by the many gentlemen we met, nobles of high degree. She had indeed grown to have a loveliness of face and figure, and best of all, of character, which was no longer heartless, but very gentle, since her sad experience of secret motherhood and consequent disbarment from its innocent joys, since the child might not be known as hers. She had had offers of honorable marriage find refused them, knowing even as she did so that the fact of their proffer was a proof of my having spoken falsely when I told her that the laws of Poseid forbade our marriage. But her love for me, if it suffered, was faithful and knew no lessening, and she kept the secret well, and the more closely for my sake, wretch that I was. As I looked upon her, I felt that she was very dear to me, but Anzumi was more so, and therefore the hideous tragedy went on. I knew that from love of me, Lolix had first repressed heartless remarks, then taken an interest in relieving suffering for its own sake, and so had become transformed from a beautiful thorn tree to a glorious rose of womanly loveliness, with few thorns indeed. Had I really any conscience deserving the name, that I did not come out before the world and take Lolix as my wife after all this boundless love for me? No, not in Poseid. Conscience had not slept. It had never been existent. It was yet to be born, and grow in a later time. Thus did the nemesis of judgment still withhold her stroke.